So with that, I am going to turn it over to Craig, who is going to talk about advanced Puppet design. And this is Craig, not Greg, for those of you that saw the typo on the agenda.
Is this coming out too loud, or is it all right? Can you hear me? Yeah? Nope. Apparently not. Is that better? Awesome, thanks. Hi, so welcome to my talk. A little bit about me before we get started. So my name's Craig Dunn, as Dawn pointed out, that's with a C, not a G. I've been a Puppet user since about 2008. Previously worked for Puppet Labs, so awesome company to work for. I think Andy said this morning that they're hiring. They're always hiring. But these days I'm a sort of more of a freelance automation engineer and trainer through my company Enviatics. I'm based out in Spain, but there's not a lot of work there, so I tend to work everywhere apart from Spain. So what I'm going to talk about today, I was originally going to call this the roles and profiles talk, but Puppet design is about a lot more than just the roles and the profiles. So we are going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about writing good modules and how to overcome some of the challenges of code-based design in Puppet. But before we get into that, so raise your hand if you've developed a code base, a Puppet code base in the past. I was hoping that more than one would put the hand up. And keep your hand up if you've had to go back from scratch and rewrite it again. It's almost the same number who put their hands up. Awesome. So what I'm trying to cover is ways of thinking that in the future you won't have to hit that step where you then have to go back and rewrite everything because stuff doesn't fit. So the first exercise is to try and think properly about what we're trying to do. So your business will come to you with requirements, and we're going to use technology to fulfill those requirements. That's great. But it's not that simple. And what we see a lot is the business logic, so how the business sees our infrastructure and sees the services, doesn't align with the actual technological design. So, for instance, your manager comes up to you, we have a business requirement of 3 applications that we want to deploy with Puppet. And that's cool, because we do Puppet. So we go off and Puppetize. And the first thing we do is say, OK, the business asked for 3 applications, so I'm going to write 3 Puppet modules. Because that was the requirement, wasn't it? Or was it? So what you might find is, a little bit down the line, things are starting to not work very well. And you're starting to figure out, you're starting to think why you're trying to drive that square peg through the round hole. So as an example, let's suppose that what the business is calling an application is just a shared set of components, and they're just implemented a different way. So that's what they really are. So now we start to see a bit of a difference between what the business see, which is correct from their point of view, but the technical reality of these 3 applications is that there's much more overlap. So we can't just think about it as 3 applications. Some of the danger signs that you'll start to see creeping into your code, and so resources being declared in 2 modules, that's probably one of the most classic ones. If you can't really put your finger on it, but you just don't know how your implementation fits. So you've written all these modules, and it's like, well, how do I glue all this stuff together? How do I make it work? Logic at a node level, I'm going to talk about a bit more in a minute, but it's basically saying, for every node I've got, I care about lots of little things about it. Repetition and duplication, so if you're starting to cut and paste, that's bad. And if you start solving every problem with the if statement, you're probably running into bigger problems. There's then a couple of things which I like to think of more as catastrophic signs. So if you start to have code like this creeping into your manifests, if you're making decisions based on what the regex of a host name is, this is probably not the solution. You want to be looking at things like Hira and other stuff. And is Felix still in the room who did the talk? Yeah? So Felix should like the last one. So my other catastrophic sign is if defined. Felix talked about this a lot in the talk before last. For all of his reasons, I don't like it as well. You should know within your code base that this package HTTPD is managed by one resource and one resource only. So one resource declaration. So what I don't want is the package HTTPD to be managed, but I don't know where it was managed. And also Felix mentioned what a lot of people think is a solution to this, and it really isn't. It's a little bit nicer because it causes stuff to fail rather than just silently breaking things. But under the hood, if you actually look at the Ruby, it's pretty much just taken the if-defined problem and moved it into Ruby. So after catastrophic signs, I have another class which is world-ending signs. So who here is aware of parser equals future? So parser equals future is fairly new. I can't remember what version it got originally released in. Anybody? 3.3. And the intention, parser equals future unlocks a lot of new and funky cutting-edge syntax that's not normally available in the Puppet language. And the reason Puppet Labs put it out there was so you can experiment with stuff, give them feedback, and collaborate. They didn't put it there so you could solve your production problems. Order equals manifest. I think the community is a little bit split on opinion. I personally think if you're writing modules that depend on order equals manifest, maybe you should go back and look at why you need that. So if any of these danger signs are starting to resonate with you and you recognize any of them, you're going to be on the road very quickly to having an unhappy Puppet. And nobody wants an unhappy Puppet. So what are we going to do about it? First thing, let's stop thinking about what stuff looks like or what people tell us stuff is, and break everything down into individual components. So granularity, I'm going to talk about quite a bit, and that's the key here. And then think about what it actually is you're trying to do, not just how it looks, not how the end result looks. So before we worry about roles, profiles, hierarchy, anything else, we want to be writing good modules. And the three mantras I always try and use when writing a module is keep it granular, keep it portable, and let users decide how things get done. So flexibility of implementation. Don't dictate how a module should configure itself. So here's an example of a bad module. So it's not granular, so we're trying to manage the HTTP, the PHP, and the MySQL Server package resources all from this class web. And portability, so at the top we've got lots of hard-coded data that's specific to just our environment. And we're also making assumptions on operating systems, for instance, with the package names and file locations. So this module just isn't implementable. I don't even know if that's a word. So first thing we need to do always is keep our modules granular. If that means you have a lot of modules, that's fine. And if that means you have small modules, that's fine. Keep them granular. So here's an example of a more granular module. So it's getting better. It's granular. We're only managing resources that are directly related to Apache in our class called Apache. But we're still not portable. So we've still got this hard-coded data that's specific to our environment. And so sharing is good. You should always be thinking to write your stuff with the intention of sharing it with others. So not only can you share that within your team, and when we come on to talk about profiles, you can even share it with yourself. You can publish on the Forge, and people will collaborate when you do this. So unless you really like doing all the work yourself, get others to do it, because it's all about sharing. And some people work for organizations where sharing is difficult, where there isn't a culture of contributing back upstream to open source projects, but they're still happy to use free software. And if you're in that kind of organization, you just need to learn to try and delicately persuade people around you that this is a good thing and we should be sharing. So also, when people talk about sharing, they tend to just think about GitHub. And sharing's not just about pull requests. You can share if you don't code. You can share your ideas on blog posts. You can tell the world what worked and what didn't for you, help others. And the same with mailing lists and IRC. So from a Puppet point of view, how do we make sharing easier? So we separate the data from the code using Hira, and we want to allow the user the flexibility of implementation of our module. So the pattern that gets used for this is the params pattern. The params pattern has been around since pre-Hira and has sort of evolved and has gone through several iterations. I will probably get shot for it and never use this term again, but I thought I'd throw it out there. I think defaults is a much nicer name. But the idea is the same. So we use a parameterized class, and we default our variables from an inherited class, and we allow the user to decide implementation. So going back to our Apache class, the main problems with this, we've got this in-module private data, and we've got no way to override this. If we turn this into a parameterized class, already we've got a major win. We can have our defaults as a parameterized class, and then users, when they implement our module, can decide either when they declare the class, what they want these values to be, or they can override them in Hira. But we didn't get much control over our defaults with that pattern, so you can go one step further and create this Apache defaults. I'll reword it to Apache params if nobody likes it. But this gives us the ability to, within our code, make decisions on what those defaults should be. So not just, don't just default to Apache, default to Apache 2 if we're on Debian. And you'll also notice what I didn't have in there before was IP address and FQDN. So if there are sensible defaults, use them, because the easier you can make it for your users, the better. And then our parameterized class can just inherit from that. And when we refer to these configuration variables within our manifest now, we always refer to the one that's in the base class. We never ever want to be talking to the one in the defaults class, or we'll lose the ability to override that from Hira. So we've gained 3 things by just following this kind of pattern. So we got smaller modules with a smaller scope, only managing things that they care about. We've taken out that hard-coded data from modules, and we've made the implementation a lot easier, so our users can decide how and where they want to override. So when we're talking about Puppet design, this is what I like to call our component modules now. So these are the building blocks that we're going to use. And we've got our component modules, and they're cool and they're well written, so it's time to build something awesome now. But where? So how do we piece all this together? Most people who design Puppet follow this kind of stack. So we've developed all these component modules, and then what we call node classification. Node classification is just assigning classes to nodes. So include Apache. The problem with this model, I mentioned node level logic earlier, is that we end up in this kind of mess where for every node we're worrying about the class Apache, we're worrying about the class MOTD, the class SSH. It's a lot. The pattern a lot of people used to overcome this in the very, very old days was node inheritance. And I don't think there's anybody alive who thinks that's a good idea. So you risk duplication and repetition. You don't have any guarantee of consistency because you're just chucking all this data at the node level. And if you are using these pseudo nodes and inheritance trees, it's going to get really messy really fast, and that's why everyone tells you don't ever do it. And so it's too much information at this node layer. So then we start thinking, okay, so Puppet's a code base. It's code, you're writing code. And in any other code base, you have some kind of a framework to develop around, a development framework, and a way to glue everything together in a sensible way. And Puppet's no different. So with Puppet, the first layer that I use in this pattern is profiles. So this is taking all our component modules now and doing something with them. So a profile is effectively a wrapper class implementing those component modules. And we use profiles to define a logical technology stack, emphasis on technology, not business logic. But just one, we don't want to fall into the problem with modules where we're trying to do too much in one place. So a profile should be limited to the things that make up logically that technology stack, not the whole world. So here's a quick example. My profile for blog. There's a couple of interesting things here. So I'm implementing component modules for MySQL and for Word.